Welcome to Ethical Edge Insights, Conversations with ChangeMakers, a space for deeply reflective conversations with those shaping our world. Here we explore their journeys, their greatest challenges, their most significant contributions to date, the contributions they seek to make, and how ethics have shown up along the way. Join us as we uncover the stories that shape our shared future. Well, there's a thing about being nervous is for me, my mum always tells me that when I'm nervous or anxious, like if my daughter's going in for an operation, I talk a lot. I just don't shut up. And she just knows that I'm really at my edge. So that's what happens. But here we are recording. And thank you so much, Todd, for joining us for this Conversations with ChangeMakers. You are the second interview. I was the first one, kind of had to get that out the way. You were the second one. So I'm really happy that you've agreed to come and have this chat with me. And I'm just, we do have these series of questions that I'm going to plug in that's going to help me do the write-up. But I want to start with the first time we interacted, and maybe that's why I'm a little anxious. It is that I recall listening to you talking and I thought, this guy, he's going off, he's going into flow. It's like, and I contacted you and I said, did you just go into flow? And you go, do you think so? That's my superpower, what I'm doing. So I'm going, here I am engaging in a chat with Todd and he's likely just to like take off into flow again. I was going, I'll just keep following him. It's all right.
Oh, it's great. It's great.
So I think it'll be good. The other time I've come across your work is this book, which I know and still got, I can't remember why they're all there, but they are. And Joseph, your mate here,
Yeah.
co-author, he was one of my university lecturers. And he was my fourth year supervisor for a longitudinal study that we did around hope and self-esteem and academic performance of adolescent students, high school students.
Wait, that got a lot of citations, that paper.
Oh, really? I'm not on it, but it did?
Oh, yeah. I didn't, because I don't always look at all the authors. Yeah, that paper got a lot of cites.
Oh, very good.
Well, you should have been on it. So if you were in my lab, you would have been on it.
Anyway, so yeah, I know him, of course, because he kind of drilled us down a bit in our exams, and so that was the first touch for me, the first real acknowledgement touch that I'd been involved in your work there, to have read that book, and it was a great book.
Thank you.
Actually, and
Appreciate
I've
it.
read it a few times. So now I'm going to go to the next book. Just going to showcase a little bit of where we've touched points. This one, the real second wave of positive psychology with you and Robert Biswas-Diener. So, I mean, people need to give that a lot more credit for being, I think, the impetus for the second wave than what they do.
I appreciate that. We're actually not a fan of waves. I'm definitely not a fan of waves, so I'm fine as long as people read the book, enjoy it.
Well, there's a lot to get out of it. And then, of course, I don't have any of your curiosity books. I think, have you got one or two curiosity books?
That was my first book, was Curious in 2009.
Okay. I don't have that. Just so I can't, I'm
It's
actually hoping I'm tickling you. Right, when people get on calls and people show me one of my books, I get awfully tickled. So I'm like, I'm going to tickle Todd. So here we go, a third tickle and your most recent book. Yeah. So,
Yeah, thank you.
and it's still going pretty hot around the place, which is great.
There is never a sufficient surplus of social courage, so I don't see it being time bound anytime soon.
Yeah. Well, I think it's great that for all three of those books that I've just shown here, they are all timeless, in fact. I would
Thank you.
argue that they are.
I mean, that's the goal. I mean, the goal is to kind of capture a snapshot of some elements of humanity that are not like, completely stuck in like whatever the cultural milieu is at the time. And Curiosity will always be valuable. Courage will always be valuable. Appreciating that some of the things that you view as too dark and too dangerous, actually in small doses, are exactly what make you amazing and powerful. These are truisms that go back to Carl Jung in the 1800s.
So that was an unusual introduction to Todd and his work. Tell us a little bit more about you and your history.
Well, I mean, I had the fortuitous situation of starting graduate school the same year Marty Seligman coined the phrase positive psychology. Now it's realized that Abraham Maslow might have wrote it somewhere on his notepad next to his phone before him.
Oh,
Um,
really?
s- so in 1998, I was at a talk by Martin Seligman, um, Robert. Who's the creativity researcher? Robert Sternberg and Banaji. And so this is like the giants in psychology. And then I asked a question of Seligman. I can't remember what it was. And then after his talk, he came over to me and said, like, you know what? That's a pretty insightful question. Like, what are you studying? And I was telling him how I was studying the onset of panic attacks. Like, why do people have panic attacks, and what are people like who experience frequent panic attacks? And he's like, why don't you study the opposite? I'll fund you, I'll support you. And that was it. That was the start of, my career in positive psychology right from the beginning before people were talking about well-being. And I taught the second course, I believe, in the United States on the science of well-being as a graduate student. I invented it and formed the well-being lab before it was cool. So now it's been 2 decades, and we study, we're not known for one thing. We study psychological flexibility, friendship, romantic relationships, sexuality, trauma, social anxiety, meaning and purpose in life, creativity. Um, you name the topic you want to talk about at a cocktail party, we probably study it.
Brilliant. And so that's kind of brought you to where you are now. But along the way, you've written all these books I've just mentioned, and then your curious book that you mentioned. Is there anything coming along?
Yeah, I'm going to be producing a book on purpose in life. Every main area of study, there's this adage of if it's more painful not to write the book than write the book, then you write the book. I mean, so I need to write a book on purpose in life, a guidebook for humanity, and I need to write a book on social anxiety, and I need to write a book on parenting, especially for men, so they can kind of get rid of their rigid, archaic, gender stereotypes. And so these are books that are just burgeoning inside me that I'm just constantly taking notes on.
And what about loneliness?
I think people cover this almost to a fault. I
Hmm.
think that there's an increase in solitude in society. Well, I don't think the data show it. There's an increase in solitude. There are more people that are dropping their old friends. There are fewer people that are actually spending time with friends outside of their household, especially once they pair up with a romantic partner or they have kids. You've got kids that are spending, substantially less time per week with their peers. And so there's going to be neurobiological effects of people who have these big 3 pound brains that are not using it for what it's designed for, which is how do you navigate the complexities of choosing topics, switching topics, reading the minds of other people to figure out, like, oh, your emotions are basically saying is that you're bored of this topic. Like, how do I discover what you're possibly intrigued with? And all of that dancing, all of that improv jazz of socializing, if you don't do it sufficiently over the course of your lifespan, what happens to you? Are you more susceptible for degenerative brain diseases, dementia? Are you physically weaker as a function of like the mind-body connections, immunological functioning? So it's there's a lot out there. John Cassiopo did quite a bit before he passed away. He wrote a great book on loneliness. Once I feel that someone has nailed the topic down, I normally zag over to some territory that other people aren't covering.
Fair enough. Because I know that's something we've touched on previously, and it's like needed, because I know I touched on it even in my book, the pos psych PPC in the workplace one. That was the chapter that I am writing, and had to put loneliness in that. It just happened to be at the beginning of the pandemic, so it was kind of really pertinent to speak.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm curious about. I know we've got a whole other topic of ethics and stuff to come into play in more specifically, but I am curious about all those students who those young people that came through the pandemic and the outcome. I'm not sure when we'll see the outcome of the effects of that on them, but it will be interesting to see what happens as they move into adulthood.
Yeah, it appears to be, if you look at the data by Jean Twenge, is that you're seeing developmental milestones coming later. And
Mm,
so this raises all sorts of interesting issues of at the age of 18 or 21, does someone actually become an adult? There's nothing biological that says you're an adult. It's a sociological rite of passage where you
mm.
reach this point. And so if you're driving later and you are dating later and you're having sex later and you are less likely to move out of your household with your parents and you're less likely to, start your own bank account and you're less likely to travel to other countries and all of these things start to dissipate. Like what is an adult? And I think that the pandemic will actually open up some eyes of maybe we have to modify some of the standards we have in terms of what's the age that people should be voting, what's the age that people should be allowed to get to be able to purchase a mortgage for a house. And and with those objective indicators of functioning in society, there are natural psychological and social consequences that, are antecedents and consequences of that. And I think it is going to be really interesting to see what happens. And I don't see any behavioral evidence indicators that there's post-pandemic, that people are moving towards what the trajectory was from adolescence to adulthood before. So this might be a relatively permanent shift for quite some time.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see just how society actually walks with that shift, though, because you got something like voting rights, and I think there's some argument for trying to lower the voting age already, and then you got the discrepancies across legal drinking age. I know Americans, when I was teaching at the university in Wollongong, we'd have Canadian American students come over. They just didn't study. They just went off on these drinking jaunts all over Australia. Then wondered why they got low marks. So they just took advantage of the legal age difference, So, but I don't think it's going to be interesting to see if we actually track it as a society and make the accommodations quick enough, or if it's going to be a hard slog.
Yeah, and this does dovetail nicely with ethics because when you think about what do you cognitively require for someone to be a voting member of the populace, it's not chronological age. It should be critical thinking and open-mindedness and the ability to synthesize information, the ability to form your own independent opinions outside of, primary caregivers. But you see so much conformity and so much groupthink that if you held any of the standards to adults of what I just described, you would be pulling a huge swath of people between the age of 21 and 70 and saying, you know what, you are so conformist and you are so close-minded and you are so likely to follow, the road of what the mass majority is going to say is maybe you should lose your voting rights and give it to a 15-year-old who's, taking a class on government and history and society.
Good call. Maybe they're going to read your book. So how do you think the artist's insubordination, like, because you've talked a lot of, I'm guessing you've done lots of talks on this book, and have you ever framed it up from an ethical perspective, like explicitly done that? And if you have, what's the reaction been? Like, where have you gone with it?
Well, it's an interesting frame. Actually, so invert that. The way I view it as it is unethical to be labeling someone as engaging in an act of disloyalty, an act of treacherousness, or betrayal by disagreeing with people that are at the higher rungs of social hierarchies. So that's where I've regularly couched that as an ethical violation
Mm,
because you can look at you can look at the bright spots. So one of the bright spots in society, this has nothing to do with any of the conflict that's occurring in the Middle East right now, but the Israeli Defense Forces. So every single citizen in Israel has to join the Israeli Defense Forces and be part of the nationalistic protection of the country, men and women, so they don't have the gender bias there. And one of the elements of being in the IDF is that you are trained to disagree with your superiors if you believe they are not going in the principled, proper direction, and there's evidence to suggest otherwise. Now,
Wow.
very few militaries even remotely hold the idea that principled disobedience is not only not punished, but is actually warranted. And there's something to be said about using that as a model of why do we say that if someone did an act of insubordination in the United States military is viewed as an offense that can basically lead to, your dishonorary like dismissal from the military. And I
Mhm.
would say were they were they thinking morally in terms of this was an appropriate move, or were they being impulsive and dismissive and cynical? Because if it's the former, that you actually think there's a better way, to me, that's not an offense. That's actually a great, grand, kind gesture to your group.
I mean, that has my brain sparking off to many other countries and cultures and the way they show up. And there's something to be said, I think, to be really challenging is it makes me also think about the Coaching Ethics Forum website that I've recently learned that it's been blocked in China, and I don't know how to get it unblocked, unfortunately. So people who from China who want to attend the conference have just find other ways to do it. So that's, I mean, for me, that just kind of all sparks off on the same kind of thing and how we can get around it. Yes, Phil, you want to say something now?
Yeah, well, China is interesting. Art of Insubordination was translated into Chinese, and I was super excited for people to read it because I want people to rebel against very bizarre policies in the government that challenge the integrity of people's bodies. I mean, the idea of a country determining how many kids you're allowed to have, of a history of doing that, is led to the downfall of their civilization because now you have this outpouring of this disproportionate amount of men compared to women. Because if you could only have a one child rule in China, which was for quite some time, went with legalized abortions, what people did was they basically aborted women much more disproportionately compared to men. And what they didn't think through was the consequences. Is one, two generations later, you have a disproportionate number of adult men and an insufficient number of women to pair up, assuming that, the vast majority of people are heterosexual and only about 10% of people are kind of have a different sexual orientation. They didn't think this through. And what you could have used were some people that actually said, hold on a second. It's an interesting policy. I just wonder what we say about this 15, 20 years from now. And if someone asked that question and there was a deliberate pause in that room, they would have said, there's going to be a lot of single men and very few families in 2 generations, which is where we are now.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just China that's having a bit of a population issue, and there are many countries, even here in Europe, that have this issue right now. So you spoke about where you began um, in your studies. What was it explicitly that it inspired you to go into psych?
So I worked on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange in Wall Street. I was a finance bro, which is now appreciated quite largely. And my grandmother was one of the first women to work on Wall Street, so she's kind of in the history books, and I followed her lead, or rather, she forced me to follow her lead. There's pictures of me reading the Wall Street Journal at age 9, with my grandmother teaching me how to do a regression line to look at how like earnings change over the course of time. So she wanted me to be a nerd. I became a nerd, and while I was working on Wall Street, I would regularly read books in my free time, and it was a couple of friends that noticed that, like, hey, listen, if you're gonna read Robert Sternbuck's Handbook of Intelligence and Elaine Aron's book about kind of highly sensitive people on your free time, like, why don't you go into psychology and just invest your money at nighttime? Like, why don't you flip your worlds? And this was late at night, like 2, 3 a.m., and you're very susceptible to peer influences.
Mhm.
And that was kind of it. And I pretty much quit my job on Wall Street. This was back when they had help wanted ads in physical newspapers, and I responded to an advertisement. And I worked with at Stony Brook University as a volunteer, unpaid research assistant for Arthur Aaron. And fun factoid, the study that I worked on as a research assistant was the most famous romantic relationship study probably in the past 25 years, which was what are the 28 questions that could lead you to fall in love with someone? And you'll find this in tons of books, and the New York Times published this article about this. And basically, we wondered if you got two strangers together, could you create a list of questions where they reciprocally take turns asking and answering in a specific order where it gets increases in intimacy to answer the question?
Hmm.
Would people actually fall in love with each other? And several people did. Some people actually got married, and it's become a part of the canon in terms of if you get to the start by asking people, what's your favorite holiday and why? And 15 minutes later, you ask them, when's the last time that you cried? When's the last time you cried by yourself? You could really transform a social interaction and speed up the rate of intimacy quite a bit.
Were those people tracked?
He did. It didn't make it into the first paper, but there are subsequent papers of showing is that these people either form romantic relationships or stayed in touch and stayed strong friends as a result of the study.
Hmm. Great. And then across time, did they stay? The longevity of those relationships is what I'm thinking of. Okay, staying good friends, you kind of can make sense of that, but staying in a committed romantic relationship, I'm wondering if that fast approach to connection actually gets you there.
Well, it's actually even more interesting than that because in some ways commitment is not the best variable to determine the quality of relationship because
Mhm.
with as the economy becomes more expensive to actually hold a household, people stay in unsatisfying relationships all the time.
Yeah.
What's
Yeah.
so what he discovered, there's actually a really great paper that I am not part of, where he found that putting people into an fMRI machine and actually scanning their brains to see like dopaminergic responses. Does the ventral striatum, which is associated with novelty, is it activated when you see pictures or hear the vocal acoustic sounds of your romantic partner? These are people 20, 30 years into their relationships. And what they found was 20% of couples approximately have this really intense physiological feeling of romantic attraction and like draw, and they still feel the novelty and the excitement and the enthusiasm. So I view this as bifurcated. One is you could have a really long-term, deep romantic relationship where it's kind of like that kissing scene in the movie The Notebook that you can hold on to that for long periods of time. But do you
Mhm.
know that the majority of people it declines precipitously. Intimacy goes high, commitment stays high, but romance tends to kind of take a decline over the course of time. And so the question that that research leads to is, how do you get into 20%? Do you want to be in the 20%?
Mhm. Mhm. We just not got to have kids.
It's a huge
Maybe China's
shortcut.
got it right.
Yeah, shoots the ladder. It's like once you have that kid, you just get that slide and you just drop right down to, level 3.
Yeah, I wonder then when it ever actually goes way back up again, because once you got a kid, you've always got a kid, and then you might have grandkids, although they're just wondrous in their own space anyway.
Yeah, I'm gonna wait patiently for grandkids. I have no rush.
Very good. So my next question is, I'm just going to go to my questions now to make sure I get them asked. And it is, what do you consider to be the most important contributions to the coaching or mentor or just the professional space that you're in that you've made, do you feel?
Um, so this requires me to be non-humble, so I just want to put that caveat in
Exactly. I want
advance.
you right out there. Yeah.
So there's a content and there's a process, I think, contribution. Content-wise, I think that our definition and framework of purpose in life and curiosity I think, have been helpful because I think it's important to, if you can't describe psychologically what something is. It's very hard to understand where people are and what they aspire to become. So the idea of clarifying the three dimensions of purpose in life, it is a central self-organizing life aim. I've got papers people can read for free, on the website about that. I think it really took this thing from, Viktor Frankl and Primo Levi and everyone who's ever studied, purpose in life or thought about it before and said, well, let's describe what this thing actually is and separate it from what leads to it and what the benefits are. That was, I think, has been one really important contribution because a lot of coaching is about people trying to figure out, like, how can I do something fulfilling? How can I make a difference with my life? Like, how do I deal with this life transition where I no longer feel the fire inside for the work that I'm doing? Or as you're saying, here I am as having kids and taking care of my family. Like, I don't feel a sense of purpose other than I've got to keep these little creatures alive. Like,
Mhm.
what else is out there? You need to be able to describe it, define it, understand it to work with that concept. And the same thing with curiosity. I think the idea of us saying that rather than ask people, how curious are you? In what way are you curious? With a multidimensional model has really moved the needle. Um, I've seen a lot of people use our model and I love it. And people have tweaked it and morphed it and messed with it. And listen, I don't care. Like by the time I'm 80, I hope like it's antiquated and someone's created a better model. Like it's fine with me. And I think process wise, I would hope that people that have interacted with me or heard me speak or really taken my writing seriously is to not be afraid to call out just horse shit that's out there in the field and pseudoscience and bad psychology and bad pos psychology and things that do not have evidence before it and because there are always consequences. The the lowest possible consequence that everyone will have is an opportunity cost. If people spend time focusing on an intervention and developing something that has less potential influence on the domains of the life that are important to them, that's something else you could have been working on with your limited time and energy in a given day, week, and month. And so I'm a hopeful cynic in terms of like I am willing to challenge people that are bigger than me, stronger than me, more distinguished than me. I've had my beef with Martin Seligman and I've had beef with other characters, and it's nothing to do with them. It's just that I am a strong proponent of people's singular experience on this earth should be spent wisely, and I don't want them spinning their wheels doing something that doesn't have sufficient backing to show that it's more helpful than the alternatives that are available. If it's just exercise and nutrition and sleep, then stick with that. I mean, don't add psychological intervention into your life if there's evidence that they're practically inert. And so I hope people take that mantle and are willing to risk social capital because you care so much about humanity.
So would I just asked you, what do you consider to be your most important contributions? What's the one contribution that, whether you feel it's had the biggest impact or not, but really, really jives you? Like you think that I really love this piece, no matter what you think its impact has been.
I even know the paper, 2013 paper with Patrick McKnight. We basically studied, could you alter people's emotional life even though they have social anxiety disorder, suffering from a condition that makes them fear that that the parts of themselves that has flaws and weaknesses will be visible to other people, and it will be the reason that people will evaluate them negatively, reject them, and ostracize them. It's a tough way to live your life because everyone has weaknesses and frailties and problems, and it's silly to think that we only have a series of strengths.
Mm.
But if you chronically feel that it's visible and it's going to be the cause of your social demise, that's a tough way to live. And we basically did the study to see, what if we didn't even touch anxiety? What if we didn't touch your concerns about other people? What if we only had people think about on a day-to-day basis, what are you striving for most in your life? And then each day, to what degree are you devoting effort towards it? To what degree are you making progress? Maybe it's about creating beautiful music. Maybe it's about being at one with nature. Maybe it's about being in touch with a higher power, a synagogue, a mosque, a church, whatever it is. Caring for your kids. And what we found was demonstrable changes in people with anxiety disorders, more positive emotions, more meaning in life, more joy, less negative emotions, higher self-esteem and self-worth, not even touching social anxiety. And I love that study, and nobody has yet to replicate or extend it. And it kills me. It's been 12 years and no one's touched it. People cite it all the time, but I mean, that piece of work is kind of really, to me, really interesting. It's saying you have this naturalistic intervention that you could deploy where the thing that seems to be the most troublesome mental health condition, you might not even have to go near it and still improve people's lives. You can take this backdoor effect. You can ski downhill with the things that are the most important to them. And the implications of that for making interventions that people are willing to actually do, I think is pretty profound. But again, no one's really built on that work.
It's fascinating because, I don't know about that paper. Um, but it reminded me of a client I had when I was in Australia. So when I was providing therapy, I was working out of a private psychiatric clinic, and it was a 5-minute walk from the beach and the walkway. And so I just, this one client just came to mind, and how she was pretty intensely, her anxiety was pretty high, her social anxiety was really high, and she was struggling to even come to the sessions. So I had to work really hard to get her to come. But then we'd just get up and leave the room. We'd walk down the beach and we'd just go for a walk along the pathway or along the sand, and just basically talked. I mean, it was therapeutic, I was conscious about boundaries and things, but it was that was transformative for her. This is what she just wanted to do. She just wanted to have a friend. Not that I was a friend, but I was the closest thing she had to it at the time, aside from
Yeah.
her husband. And that, I mean, without even knowing your paper, I was just intuitively was working this way with her because I've never been a cognitive behavioral therapist. So I would work in other ways. And yeah, so different interventions like that I did with her to just, she's gone from being totally withdrawn from society in every possible way to now, last time I heard from this person, they were heading up some O emergency service call unit in Australia. And I'm going, wow, I would never have imagined they'd like gone to that level of help, being able to be that integrated in society and to take on that kind of pressure. Like, that just blew me away that they had, long after me, had grown in so much to have taken it on. But it does make me wonder about the impact of my unusual therapeutic stances that I used to take with her, which is
Yeah, it sounds like you read her really well of like this seems to be the thing based on what you're saying that we should be doing, not sitting across from each other in chairs in you know, a non-ventilated office room.
it was a strange place to work in, I have to say. The waiting room was just something altogether. It was just like watching a play, everyone interacting. Sometimes it was the only time that they were actually interacting was in the waiting room. And so some of those people were, back in the day, they probably would have been in institutions or something like that. So it was really unusual behavior and dynamics that would play out in the waiting room. And it was their social life, in fact, for many of them, and which is unusual,
Yeah.
just as a point of difference to arrive in France. And everyone here um, organizes their appointments, even though they have a waiting room, so as no one passes each other. Just,
Right.
you don't know who's left, and you don't know who's waiting to go in. It's just
So
orchestrated.
more trade-offs. You give people the anonymity of coming to a mental health clinic, but you miss all these potential connections that it could occur if you granted more social license for people to be around each other who are also suffering.
Well, the normalizing of asking for help, for psychological help, like in Australia, was way ahead in terms of normalizing it and being it's okay to go and seek psychological help. To come to France, and it's like, for me, it took me back long before I was even a psychologist to have
Yeah,
this very different way of interacting in it. And I just saw the hindrance to how the society as a whole views going for psychological help. It's like, let's normalize it and say it's okay and it's a wonderful thing to go do, not something we need to hide behind. And
is France higher on mental health problems compared to the rest of Eastern Western Europe?
well, that I don't know. I'm not involved I'm not a therapist anymore for a long time, and I don't keep into that space at all. I don't know, but people here, from what I do understand, that they will seek therapy just for the hell of it.
That's
Um,
good. That's what you want.
Yeah, but they don't talk about it. It's kind of hidden, It's like they go in for it's very psychodynamic, Jungian, laying on a lounge, quite passive therapy, heavily reflective, navel gazing, determined, very different to, the coaching stance and to even, that cognitive behavioral, very active kind of dynamic that you have. So they're quite shocked when I was providing therapy when I said, no, I expect you to work when you come to me. They wondered where my lounge was so they could lay down. I said, no, you got to sit up. We're going to work here. We're not just going to hang back and have a little think about the world. We're going to think about it and act on it. So
Yeah, yeah. It's amazing how long. I mean, it's a good reminder of like what we're thinking of now is that the apex of psychological interventions is like how long it took to focus on the behavior.
mm,
Like it should always be two parts action to one part thinking at the minimum. So that I mean that took, a good 100 years to get there.
yeah, I mean, there's an enormous amount of empowerment that comes from people committing to some kind of action, having some kind of behavioral element to take away from an initial interaction with people. It's as long as it's, they're on board with it and they honestly believe it's that they can do it, just something small, can be incredibly empowering. And I think we forget that and start to go too far into other aspects of interventions that we can do as therapists. But, I'm not a therapist anymore for a long time, which is a good thing.
Well, I mean, I put it all under the umbrella of like, there's a interpersonal interaction to try to make therapeutic progress, and I don't care what your title is.
Yeah. Yeah, well, this is true. They do have trouble. They talk about it being very difficult to see the difference between the two. So next question, just to make sure we get through them,
Sure.
is it's about ethics and decision making and your decision making. My query around this is, as one of the things I've been working on, is that I don't think people are honestly conscious about where ethics plays into their decision making. They just seem to see them as separate things, that I'm deliberately focusing on ethics now, but I'm making a decision about this over here. So where do you see it playing out? Probably in your research, for one, I'm sure, but in what other areas of your work?
I mean, for me, you should be having these automatic caveats in a vast number of your social interactions in general. So the research is obvious. You've got an institutional review board. You have to actually write down what are the costs of doing for a participant involved in research. What are the benefits they have? They'll come back to you and say, no, there are no benefits. You're making that up. You're just trying to make it sound good. But when I think about socializing, I mean, the idea of let's say someone cuts you off on a road and then it ends up that you stop and you end up being in the same supermarket and you run into each other. One of you is probably going to be quite angry. Probably both of you are going to be outraged to some degree. That happens there. To me, the ethical way of having this argument, this debate, this problematic encounter is to start with caveats, which is, what is your personal responsibility to what just occurred there? And so if I could have been going too slow and that could have been the reason they cut me off, They could have been basically been erratic, and that's why I cut them off that happened there. But just to offer your perspective and lens is an ethical element, so it doesn't get derailed and it doesn't kind of like disintegrate into some, spiral of aggression that can occur between two people. And when you're going into an interview, just like today, like, you started off this conversation by saying that you were a little bit anxious, that discomfort caveat is an ethical way of interacting. And so it's not just for yourself, the ethics of like self-care, but it's also the ethics of me of like, hey, like just don't be too competitive and aggressive and like hypomanic just off the bat because like right now for whatever reason like there's some physiological stuff going on in the system here that goes in there, and with that ethical way of communicating,
Mm-hmm.
I think you just have like a better interaction that occurs there. And I think we forget of just that ethics aren't just about moral dilemmas. You know, if my next door neighbor is right now is in a financial bind and they have to pay, tens of thousands of dollars because their kid has this very rare blood cancer, am I willing to steal from a store where I know that they are raking in cash? In those moral quandaries, it's easy to talk about ethics. I
Mm-hmm.
think, and I believe, and I do, insert ethics into everyday life, and I really do believe that social contracts of committing to interaction with people and committing to relationships, there is
Mm-hmm.
an ethical element of letting people know um, where you have like your difficulties and your responsibilities, and then also like and also at the same time, where is the demarcation, the line where you're not responsible, like you only you're not owning more than 50-60% of the social interaction even if you're in a power position. And so I think the ethics goes both ways, is one is showing respect to do no harm, and the other one is to protect yourself from having this boundaryless life where people basically can, infect you and harm you in the same way.
So you've given a couple of little examples in there, but I'd love for you to share a real nutty example, a real life one, if you will, that
Sure.
you engaged in. And what fuels me to ask this kind of question is, the Champions of Courage Awards, which I've launched. It's just I want to encourage people to actually share their stories. Let's change the narrative of the stories we tell, that we're not all great because we've been around for 100 years and doing all these great thinking to the profession, but we've actually been acting in ways which we need to champion as well and share the stories, infect everyone with these wonderful stories.
Yeah, I'll tell you the famous pod psychology blow up at the International Pod Psychology Association. That's unheralded and only some people know, and it's stayed out of the public spotlight. Several years ago, Um, I was sitting next to Sonia Lieber-Mirsky and Barbara Fredrickson, listening to Martin Seligman speak, and James Pulowski came on stage, and he offered the first ever International Psychology Association Fellowship Awards, and
Mhm.
he announced Chris Peterson, who came on stage, Ed Diener comes on stage, Mike Csikszentmihalyi comes on stage, Martin Seligman comes on stage. And I'm sitting there with Sonia and Barb. Not one woman was on that stage. Not one woman, not one man who was not white was on that stage. And this bothered us. Now, everybody's clapping, everybody's going nuts. Ed Diener's amazing, Chris is
Mhm.
amazing, Mike's amazing, Martin's amazing. Um, and I saw James Pulaski afterwards, and and I said, "Hey, I got to tell you, like, no audience. I just me and him, and I just said, I got to tell you, that was a very strange thing. Why were the fellowship? I was just curious, like, why did all the fellowship awards go to the people that founded the organization? Like,
Mhm.
that's like Mark Zuckerberg getting Employee of the Month at Facebook because I mean, it's the same, it's a perfect analogy. And he said, no, it wasn't like that. They didn't know that they were going to get them. I'm like, but they created the organization. So like, why wouldn't you give it to people? Like everybody already knows them. Like, like, why wouldn't you give it to young scholars, young scholar fellowship awards of up and coming stars who are not known by the crowd, and make sure that, acknowledge like some of the people that maybe don't look like me that are in the audience. And he got really puffy, really upset. Um, and the board contacted me, and I have never spoken at a conference since that time. Going there. Now, here's the interesting part of the story. That's a lesson about courage.
Mm-hmm.
2 years later, at their conference, they changed the way that they give away awards, and that they would have a distinguished scientist come onto stage and announce the award for a younger person who's up and coming in the field. Now,
Fabulous.
guess who they never mentioned who came up with this idea for the award, who is never invited again to speak at this conference. So
Todd.
so you can dissent and disagree because you
Yeah.
disagree and think that these are problematic norms, it's
Mm.
outdated ideas, or something just dysfunctional happen right in front of you. You can keep quiet and nothing will happen to you. And guess what? You'll do nothing profound potentially in your life. Or you could speak up and you may not get credit, which is fine. Is your goal to be like applauded and like as like this amazing innovator in this organization, or do you just want to see change? And so like for me, like I just like to see change. That's why like I have the temperament where I could speak my piece. I get social costs like this that happen where I'm not invited ever again to give a talk.
Mm.
I've been waiting for someone to say, like, listen, you know what? It's been 10 years. We'd love to have you back. And we, let bygones be bygones. Actually, you know what? You were right. Like it was kind of silly to give all the people that everybody already knew were distinguished professors awards and do it a different way. Um, yep, it is a perfect example of, if you are the lone dissenter in a problematic organization or group, you probably will barely be listened to. You might not make an impact for quite some time. And when you do make an impact, you're probably not going to get credit. And guess what? It's still worth it.
I just want to ask you, was there a fundamental problem with those people getting those awards just because they created the organization, or was it more that there just wasn't the diversity?
Both.
Both.
It's primarily the first one's the problem. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it, part of one of the great benefits of leadership is that you amplify the voice of people who are amazing, who aren't being seen or heard.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a positive psychology conference.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're talking about. I really believe in not engaging in too much hypocrisy as you're walking through your world. And if you're talking about anything about positive leadership, which they always are, it doesn't make sense to take the stage and not amplify anyone's voice, and instead just pat yourself on the back in front of a room full of people who you know are a captive audience that's going to love you for it. Your
Mm-hmm.
job is to take the risk and say, you know what? We're going to give the stage to people that you should be appreciating and you haven't even heard of. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what you do. And that's, everyone could talk about diversity and everybody could talk about like taking care of early career, practitioners and researchers and leaders. But who cares what you say? It's what you do. It goes back to the action part again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It is. This kind of behavior it still happens
Oh, yeah.
um, in myriad of ways. Um, Not just about award giving, but it still happens in according to status, according to the desire to maintain or to build status, etc. This kind of behavior still happens, and doesn't give other people either due recognition or due um, or give them the platform that they perhaps could have, and to see how they then work with it. So I think it shows up in a myriad of ways professionally.
I think it's worthwhile to whoever your hero or heroines are to look at to what degree are they creating room for other people? I mean, I make a big deal, in my Substack newsletter, having issues about scientists that people should know more than me because and regularly, Maya Tamir in Israel, people barely don't know her. She's like, her research is at the core of Robert and I's book, The Upside of Your Dark Side. And
Mm.
then, you've got Michael Robinson in University of North Dakota. Like, probably there's not one person who's listened to this that knows who he is. He's published
Mm.
like twice as much papers that I've published, and is I mean, he's profoundly like thought about like the like personality as momentary states that combine together of contingencies of like when a lot of people are here, I tend to have a lot of vitality. And when there are a lot of people who are strangers, I tend to be very quiet. So now it's not really introversion or extroversion. It's very clear situational atlas responses that makes your personality. Really cool research. Nobody talks
Mm.
about Michael Robinson. And so what I like
Mm.
to do is I like to like share to the world of, write about these people. And it's because I strongly believe that at my age and at my stage of my career that start giving some of the platform away to people, not
Yeah.
because there's a DEI initiative, not because
Uh,
people are saying diverse support. It's because there are amazing people that should have as much of a voice as I do or more.
Absolutely. I totally agree. So moving on to the next question is that what legacy do you hope to leave? I mean, you've left one already. Like, let's face it, there's already a pretty decent legacy there, but like just dreaming big, what would you love to leave more so?
I mean, I think we've sort of covered this. I mean, I
Mm.
really believe you can be a great scientist who is high in generativity and who just brings people's attentional spotlights to areas that they have previously not considered. And I think, I try to do that like quite a bit. Like
Mm.
curiosity wasn't a hot topic in 2007 or 2004 when I started studying it. I mean, and I picked the mantle up from Daniel Berlin from the 1960s in University of Toronto, who almost nobody knew who he was back in the 1990s. Um, and then since then, there have been like dozens of TED Talks about curiosity and dozens of books about curiosity. But I think it's a process-oriented legacy of z- you know, zig while other people are zagging. Like, go to the places where people aren't exploring. So if everyone's talking about the value in action character strengths, and everybody's talking about gratitude, and everyone's talking about mindlessness, like ask yourself, there can't possibly be 3 to 5 things that are essential to the welfare and the quality of life of humans, relationships, groups, cultures, organizations, societies. There's more than grit. There's more than curiosity. There's more than courage. There's more than mindfulness. So go in the dark with your canaries and your small flashlights and go find the good stuff. And I think I would like to believe that my legacy was to push more people to be courageous in how they pursue information, and even when they're just by themselves in there. And if you contacted me, I mean, I'll probably be a supporter. I love the little guys and gals that are going after experimentally the pieces that other people are missing.
Well, I think we got a little bit of extra something there in what you would like to leave behind, which is very good. So the last question for today, and then I'm going for a glass of red wine in my evening time. It is, what do you believe is the most pressing issue in the field today? And how are you trying to address it if you are?
Yeah. Um, I mean, for me, I think there's a lot of answers to this question. I'm obsessed with um, non-obtrusive behavioral data. So I'm interested in basically people will say that they're happy, they have a purpose in life, they love their kids, they just want their kids to be happy, and then you observe their behavior and it doesn't match up, right? Like people will
Mhm.
say like, all I want is my kids to be happy. And then you start talking to them and you realize like, God, I hope my kid's not transgender. Man, like oh, is my kid going to college? Oh, you bet they're going to college. Like that's there's no other way that's going about that. Are they gonna live at home when they graduate college? Like, no, like I'm not coddling my kid. I'm not gonna have them come home like for mental health reasons and physical health. Like, how weak is this generation? As they start to add details, you realize that first statement isn't actually true about just your kid, just wanting your kid to be happy, because you have a lot of baggage that you're stuffing down their throat in terms of what their life is supposed to look like. And so for me, I'm really interested in this this like elusive asymmetry between what you say and what you do. And I don't think we've actually done enough there, especially in the well-being world, in terms of everybody knows what to say. Because what we tend to study is healthy, positively valence things. Like everybody likes to say they're gritty. Everybody likes to say they're curious. Everybody likes to say they relish creativity until you watch what happens when someone reveals a creative idea that hasn't been tested yet. And they're like, you know what? Come back to me after 5 years of stress testing that idea and showing me that it works. Well, now you're not really into creativity. You're into creative accomplishments. Those are two separate things. Like you want
Mm.
something that already be done. Don't say that you're into talent unless you're willing to take a risk on someone that hasn't shown what they're capable of yet, when they're still green and raw, that happens there, or else you're just saying the right things. And I am not a fan of disingenuousness. So I get scared of men that wear pink male feminist t-shirts. I think that you should do background checks on them. And I'm scared of people that say that that they save the whales and they spend their time like taking pictures of them holding fish, large fish on like, that's their dating profile pic that happens there. So I like to pay attention to asymmetries, and I think we need to explore it more as scientists and practitioners.
Curious. I mean, that lands right in the middle of the word I love that I'm throwing around all over the place, and that is ethicality. And I love ethicality because it takes you beyond the decision making where everyone kind of sits, and it takes you into you have to take action. And what you're just saying just aligns with that beautifully, to say, well, we're not just talking about what we're doing, we're actually living it. And so we are, going back to Carl Rogers, we're being congruent,
Yeah.
and there's a
Yeah.
degree of peace and satisfaction from living that congruency, but we're not always doing it.
Yeah. I love that. Did you come up with the term ethicality? Because I love that.
Like, I don't know. So I'm a bit of a word person, but I'm not a dictionary person unless I have to go look for something. And so it just arose and I go, is this a real word? Because I love it. I love this word. And I looked it up and I went, it's a bloody beautiful word.
It is. It's got some
It,
like some flow to it as well.
yeah, it covers the whole spans of it. So I'm throwing it out there in the way that people
I'm giving you credit.
get what it is, that they have to be actioning it, not just sitting on that thinking and navel gazing about what I should be doing.
Yes.
Mm,
Yeah, I support that mission, and I'm giving you
yeah.
credit for the word.
Thank you. So thank you so much for chatting to us. I'm going to make this interview public at some point soon, and I'll put up a write-up for the magazine. I don't know if you've seen any of the snippets of the magazine, but
No, but I mean, I love these questions. I'm so glad I didn't look at them beforehand, because this is great. I mean, you're great. This is so much fun.